So the first one is going to be, I think it's a very interesting effort we've done, which we think it's very innovative. We received a request from the Chilean government to look at how good the Transantiago system was in comparison to other, or how bad the system of Santiago was in comparison to other systems in Latin America in terms of different features. And this is what we did. And I think there's going to be some neat elements that I think you would appreciate. And I also think that here there's an opportunity to extend the analysis beyond the cities we analyzed. So we make a benchmark analysis not just of what is online, but also we were able to go to the field and measure level of service in different cities, which is a pretty difficult task. How do you compare a typical trip in Santiago with a typical trip in Bogota? There's no such thing as a typical trip. So this was the challenge. Huh? The idea is to make a comparative analysis of public transport systems of Ciudad de Mexico, Guadalajara, Bogota, Lima, Porto Alegre, and Santiago. And we chose these 6 cities because the 2 other ones that we were considering, Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo, we never had access to their OD matrix. So we only used these 6. And this is a long story, so but I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea of what are the results we obtained, and we'll be able to send you the report later. We were able to define 100 indicators with which we were going to compare the cities, and I want to focus in the 19 that were called operational, because they are the ones which are harder to measure. It's easy to say, well, there are 2 lines. There are 256 buses. However, if you think of speed, how do you compute speed? There are different speeds along the city for different trips, long trips, short trips, going downtown, going out of downtown, using an express service, using a busway, not using a busway. How do you compare? So the idea here was to, in the case of the operational indicators, we wanted to make a better comparison than what you could find in the internet or in the literature, because usually what you have, it's hard to reach in public sources, and also a fair comparison cannot be done because you don't know what was the methodology that was implemented to say, well, in Santiago the average speed is 12.7 kilometers per hour or whatever. So the idea here is we were looking at indicators, as travel time, walking time, waiting time, in-vehicle time, transferring time, or number of transfers, regularity, frequency, and operational speed. This is what we wanted to know. And the methodology, I think, is very interesting. This is what we did. We said, let's look at the OD matrix and see the variability of the OD matrix instead of waiting time. And we realized that a representative sample with a 95% of confiability, with a 5% of error, required like 380 or 360 different trips to make it within that confidential interval. So we rounded up into 400. So for every city, we looked at the OD matrix and say, let's pick 400 trips, but not just random. We wanted the 400 to make sure that it reflected very well the OD patterns in the city. So if, for instance, if within this zone and this zone you had, let's say, 10% of the trips, we forced the sample to have exactly 40 trips between these 2 zones. So the whole sample is very representative of what a city is observing daily. This is only during the morning rush. Then we define for each of those trips the fastest possible public transport itinerary for each of them, and then we went into a GIS system and identified the distance traveled for each leg of those 400 trips, and then we went to the city and measured speeds, frequencies, and regularity of a sample of services. We didn't go to all of them, but we were able to say, well, this leg looks like a typical corridor in Santiago where you go inbound. And you went and measured not all of them, but maybe 10% of them. And you assume later that every corridor, every trip going inbound would take that level of service. And finally, so based on this, we were able to infer travel, walking, and waiting time, speeds, etc. for each of the legs in the 400 trips. That's what we did. And we wanted to understand also 2 types of variability in the level of service. One variability which is very interesting is, well, I take this trip every morning and every day is alike. That would be like inter-trip variability. Sometimes it takes me 35 minutes, sometimes it takes me 40 minutes. And a different type of variability that is interesting for the city is, well, we have several kind of trips that are 10 kilometers long. And some people take 20 minutes, and some people for the 10 kilometers take 40 minutes. That would be like intra, right? Intra-city variability. So these are the results, and unfortunately from now on it's in Spanish, but I think it's going to be just graphs, so it's going to be simple. And I'm going to move pretty fast because I think there's so many information here, and I didn't have time to really polish, to cherry pick, that I want you to have only the idea of what we did. We haven't shown this yet to the minister. It's going to be shown to him next week, right? But you have an idea of what we did, and I think there's very nice results that could be extended, as I said, to different cities. So we could understand what is the effect, for instance, of a city that has been built with a metro, or with BRT corridors, or with express service, or with neither, right? So for instance, these are the distances and speeds, and you can have here, like, you see the amazing effect of a city like Mexico, how long its trips are in blue, and in red you have the speeds. And you can see that the average speed in the whole city, even for very different cities, is within a certain range. There's no huge variability, as you see, for instance, in terms of variability of distance. In terms of travel time, in blue you have total travel time, in red the variability within the city, and in green the variability within the trip. So you can see, for instance, that in Mexico, the variability within the trip is very significant. While in, let's say, Santiago, it's lower, right? And within the city, again, it's very big, the variability of Mexico, where for the same trip, sometimes trips from the same distance, they have very different level of service. We have different graphs. I'm going to move forward to something a little bit different, which I think is interesting, where you look at a particular city. Let's look at Santiago, for instance. And here what we did was, let's look at the 400 trips and distribute them within distance. And this is the distribution. These are kilometers. So most of the trips are within 2.5 and 17.5 kilometers long. And if you look at the legs, trip legs, you see here how the longer the trip, the more trip legs. And how in red you have the number of trip legs in bus, and in green the trip legs in metro. So you see here that in some way what it shows you is that in a city like Santiago, the number of legs in bus is kind of constant. And what people do is therefore increase when the trip gets longer, it's forced to do more than one leg of metro. And here we're assuming that if you change line in metro, it's 2 legs, even though it's within the same system. Is the graph clear enough? Here what we have is distance. And of course, since we have distance here and distance here, this is like a one slope line. But what's interesting here is how do you divide the distance in terms of metro and bus. And again, you see that most of the distance in a city like Santiago, if you were to minimize the length of the trip, would be done by metro. But still, of course, you have to do some of your trip has to be done by bus. Here we have in terms of travel time. And again, here we have decomposed the total travel time in three parts. In red is the walking, in green is the waiting, and in yellow is the in-vehicle. And you can see that how this decomposes between the three. So this is what we did, and you can. I don't want to go through the whole thing, but also because we haven't released it yet. But it is something that you will probably be seeing in our website pretty soon. This is like intervals of confidence, for instance, for travel time, and we have this for the 6 cities. And you'll receive probably some information soon. Okay? So this I think is pretty neat. And the other thing which I think is nice that we were able to do is that in Santiago there was a big bidding process for centers of excellence funded by the national government. They decided 6 big areas, and one of them was sustainable urban development. And we participated as Universidad Católica with the people from natural resources and from architecture and urbanism, and we won. So we have a 5 extended to 10-year funding for the group. It's pretty broad because it's not just transportation. Transportation is only 1/4 of the whole thing. And I'm going to go relatively fast. The idea here is that we will be working on 4 clusters. One of them is called Built Environment, basically directed by the people of architecture. One of them called Integrated Planning, from the people from urbanism, urban studies, and government. One of them called Critical Resources, and here we're talking about water, energy, pollution. And a final one led by us called Access and Mobility. And in Access and Mobility, what we will look at, and I'm going to move forward to that one, is 4 little things. One is going to be called Operation and Control of Transport Systems, which is basically a little bit more than what I showed you today and more. Urban Logistics, which is something that is very interesting in terms of sustainability of the city. How do you, and that will be interesting for us too. How do we share the road, the road space for buses with trucks, which also sometimes, especially when the bus road is on the, how do you call it, on the median or the, how do you call the line that is on the right? Curb. There's also an area called Financial Valuation and Externalities, and a final called Transport, Land Use, and Social Interaction. So we have got some funding for dealing with this thing for the next 5 years. So, and this is the end. This is the end of the formal talks, and I would like to know if there is some comment or issues regarding what we've been discussing today. I am particularly interested of topics that you think you didn't listen, like elements that you think this group should be addressing, and apparently nobody is looking at, and things that we should be probably looking for people that could help us address.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Regarding Operation Center.
Okay.
What is your experience? Each city has an operation center that centralizes all the commands, or in case of the Rio, we don't have a operation center specialized in transport. We take care and we manage all the question of logistic and operation, the day by day of the city. My question, I've been in London during the Olympics, and they have a headquartered focus on transport issue. Do you think, how can you, could you give me any data about the operation center?
Well,
do you have that?
Our group, you have to have in mind what we are and what we are not. What we are is a center of research, of education, and I'm not sure if we will be the right source of information for telling me which are the software providers I should contact.
But Santiago, for example, they has an operation center that centralizes.
In the case of Santiago, I can tell you, in the case of Santiago, what they do is that they have it completely disaggregated. Like every company has its own.
Not centralized.
Every unit.
Every unit, okay, every bus unit, yes.
But Santiago has a center of control in which they see every bus on the system and the
GPS
monitoring.
and they
monitor.
But they don't plan, they don't operate. For instance, in the case of Bogota, it's Transmilenio the one that decides in some way the timetables.
But Santiago sends the schedule and all the stuff.
No, Santiago, what it does, it provides frequencies. It says, look, between the 8 and 10, I want 20 buses per hour. It's your problem how to deal with this. I'm going to count, and if I see less than 20, I'm going to give you a fine. That's all they do. It's your issue, how do you address that constraint? In the case of Transmilenio, Transmilenio will tell you, I want to see buses being dispatched from the terminal in this order at this timing. we have just made an offer to a Mexican PhD who will be doing a postdoc in Santiago, looking at timetabling, crew scheduling, driver scheduling, and we're going to start working on that in March.
Good. And do you have any idea about the app that I told you that we really want to launch in Rio? Do you have an idea? Each city has a good one, just as a base.
I bet here my MIT folks can help me, but in the case of Santiago, what we've seen is that Google has been doing some work. In the case of Santiago, they are trying to put everything into the Google system, which is...
Has Google contacted you for their data? For your data? I mean, I would contact them because I think they have them for.
That's the first step, right?
It's the first step to get a really universal app.
Yeah.
And we're building a new one which mimics in some way what Google does. The problem with Google is that it's sort of obscure. You cannot intervene. You cannot use what is there. You have to, it's for them to use. They program, they do it, and you have to provide the information. And sometimes what you want is to make it a little bit more flexible.
Yeah, because on the Google, the input is powered by the citizens. So I don't know if.
No, but I think the first step here is to, if you don't already have all your networks specified in GTFS format, you want to do that soon. You can send them to Google, but that's what all the app developers, independent of Google, also use.
Yeah, so even
even
if you're not going to use Google, for the most part, all the apps that are on for phones and stuff are based on their specification of the data.
I understand that there are huh?
Not yet.
Yeah, but there are some parallel providers. For instance, there is I know there's an open source alternative called
OpenTrip Planner.
OpenTrip Planner.
Yeah,
so you can.
But the data structure.
And the good thing about OpenTrip Planner is that you can.
Juan Carlos, the data structure is the same for all the systems.
Okay.
So you still need to prepare that file.
You still need the files.
The data structure, the files are the
So
same.
it's the network and the schedule, or something like that.
Okay. Yes, Brendan?
One suggestion might be to talk to, say, TriMet of Portland, Oregon, because I presume that if you're putting an app for information, that you want it to be consistent with the other traveler information things that are available on the web, that are available from other sources and so forth. And you're going to have to drive that at least partly from the information about the public transport offer that is planned and what is actually happening in reality. So that's coming from different systems. TriMet in Portland, Oregon went through that structure, but they also made the data available to any developer who wanted to develop another app as well. So they basically made all the real-time information feeds available, and you just simply have to sign the thing that says you will not hold us responsible for anything you do wrong. But it would be useful to talk with a reputable transport authority like TriMet in Portland, Oregon, as an example of a city who's gone through this process and can tell you what works, pitfalls, what things, where the advantages are, and also how their customers responding to it. I'm sure there are many other cities as well, but that's one that comes to mind.
If you make this available, like he says, there will be people that'll start doing it right there in Rio. You know, and they'll use it, and they'll and then other people that have these apps will come in and say, oh, we'll use it too, and all of a sudden you'll have a whole bunch of apps.
So you'll probably still do your 1, 2, 3, 4, 20 apps that are the official ones, but by making the data feed available, then others can start to make something. Maybe that's around a particular metro station or a particular event, and, or to a particular user group. That is additional to the core ones you make available for the...
It's amazing how that happens.
Yeah, it is.
You don't even have to build your official.
You don't even have
you
to
can have a
develop
competition and have it crowdsourced.
I mean, Google, if you have the Google data, Google will put it in, so Google will be there, and then all these other guys will come in and start doing it too.
Tony?
Yeah, just a tough question. How are we going to address LRT, or are we not doing?
Well, we
or
remember.
even when?
Yeah, we have David and Corinne who didn't come. The people from Sydney. We have Patrick, which is a student of David who came, but and they are working on a project which they have been doing, making some progress lately, and we will inform the rest of the center, which is what are the elements that make BRT an LRT attractive and not attractive for users, and for authorities? This is the main issue.
Decision maker.
Huh? Decision maker. Thank
Okay,
you.
so we have a specific research project.
Yes, we have a research project on that part.
That's a new one.
The one we don't have, which I think is interesting too, would be to give some advice regarding under which conditions you would recommend one or the other, or metro, full metro. What makes you think that, well, this is a moment when, for instance, Transmilenio should be thinking of a metro? If there's any, maybe somebody would say, as Darío probably would say, no, Roman, we will never do, maybe, I don't know. Or what is the moment when you say, you know what, you should start thinking of an alternative? Or maybe, what's the benchmark under which BRT is too heavy for the system? And maybe you think you need something lighter. That's a project that I think we need to address, to give good and clear guidelines on when BRT is the right solution. Because we know it's not for every system, of course, and for every corridor. Comments? Questions? No?
Did you have data related with Lima? Because
On the project?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
It was the last one to have. Lima arrived,
And
made us suffer and sweat. Yes, we had Lima.
And can you share the presentation with us?
Which one?
All of those.
All the one you've seen today?
No. Yes.
Yes, all of them will be in our website.
Okay.
So what
There's
we'll
any password
do?
or
Sorry?
There's any password?
No.
Okay. let's go.
BRT.cl. We're gonna put a big new with a picture. You'll see it in the front page. You'll see yourself, and then you click, and you will be able to download I think all the presentations.
And we'll have the videos on YouTube.
And we have the videos on YouTube. You see? Great. So
Excellent.
Okay.
Well done.
No more comments? Thank you very much for attending this long morning.